Arriving in Mexico and crossing the different landscapes from Veracruz to Mexico, Diego says,
As I traveled across the vast expanse of my homeland, I was deeply moved by the panorama of the landscape. I could feel the landscape entering into my soul.
His family had moved to a house near the Merced Market in the downtown area.
Arriving at the train station in Mexico City, I saw Antonia coming from the Sierra at the same time. No one knew I was coming. However, she had dreamed about my homecoming and said,
I got here to hold you in my arms before your mother did.
At home, I had planned on surprising my family, so I had not sent a message. Entering the house, I saw my mother halfway up the stairs. She turned with a look of astonishment on her face. My mother began weeping and looking at Antonia strangely. In a tone of sadness, with defiance, she said,
Yes, I am sure that you dreamed this news about him. I know you possess him because I never have. But because I gave birth to him from my own body, you shall never be able to claim him truly as yours. Antonia replied, You gave birth to him, but if it were not for me, he would not be alive. You were not able to keep his life going. I was. That is why he is more mine than yours. Everything happened at once on Diego's arrival. Diego says,
My dog Blackie was now blind and feeble with age, and could hardly wag his tail. When he reached my feet, he lay down and began making strange sounds. I bent down and took his head in my hands. He touched my cheek with his tongue, became limp and died with a slight convulsion.
Diego's return home, the clairvoyant arrival of Antonia, the crying scene with his mother and Antonia, the news that his great-aunt Vicenta had died just 3 days before, the death of Blackie, seeing his father again, threw him in a state of convulsion. He then lost consciousness. Antonia had arrived to cure him. After several blank days, still feverish, but in a moment of consciousness, Antonia told him, No, my child, I could never leave you, and don't forget that. No matter how many roads you must take, no matter what difficulties you encounter, I will always be with you. After that, she made a witchcraft cure and repeated, I will always be with you.
Antonia left, and I never saw her again. I was cured. During the 4 years I had been away from Mexico, the political situation deteriorated, and unrest was reaching a revolutionary pitch. Diaz, sensing the end of his 34-year dictatorship was near, and yet unwilling to relinquish absolute power, was resorting to open terrorism.
Diego began to paint. He was determined to rid the Spanish influences remaining in him. He worked chiefly on landscapes into which he tried consciously to infuse a solid Mexican character. The effect of these efforts did not prove lasting. When he returned from Europe in 1912, he experienced a complete regression in style. He was still uncertain of who he was and what he wanted to paint. In the meantime, Diego became involved in a plot to kill Diaz, together with many artists and former teachers, which they believe would save the lives of many brave Mexican freedom fighters. It was planned to take place in an art exhibition of his works. Eventually, it was discovered, and some of the participants were poisoned. An old and trusted friend, Don Antonio Rivas Mercado, connected with Villa's government, sent Diego a note telling him to prepare his suitcase, only with the barest necessities. Diego told everybody he was going to a farm where he would find exciting things to paint. Diaz had issued the order for his arrest and execution for treason. The order was held until late at night to give him time to flee. Rivas Mercado had already given instructions to his coachman to take him to the train station. The next day, he was already in Jalapa. The governor of Veracruz, his friend and mentor, had urged him to go back to Europe. A week later, he was sailing to Havana, where he booked a passage to Europe. In Paris, he immediately went to see Angeline Beloff. Diego says,
Our reunion was full of love and joy. We both had agreed to wait until this moment to see whether our love was strong enough to withstand the test of separation.
They lived together for the next 10 years he spent in Europe. Diego says,
All that time she gave me everything a good woman can give to a man. In return, she received from me all the heartache and misery that a man can inflict upon a woman. By 1913, I had reached the Cubist phase of my development. I worked hard at my Cubist paintings because everything about the movement fascinated and intrigued me. It was a revolutionary moment. I went to Picasso's studio, very keyed up. My feelings were like those of a good Christian who expected to meet our Lord. In 1914, I had a one-man show at the Gallery Whale. I painted The Girlfriend and a portrait of the sculptor Jacques Lifshitz, commonly known as the Man in the Sweater. I feel proud about these paintings. After the exhibition, Angeline and I went to Mallorca with some friends. Several days later, we took the ferry to Barcelona, where we heard the Russians had just declared war upon Austria. We had to go back to Paris, but now was impossible. We had run out of money. I started painting, and I realized the painting distinctly showed the influence of the pre-conquest tradition of Mexican art. Even the landscapes I did from life in Europe were essentially Mexican in feeling. Picasso visited my studio to see my new paintings. He had, of course, heard of the controversy concerning them. He looked and was pleased. Picasso's approval turned the whole opinion of the art world in my favor. Yet, though I had arrived, I was still searching for a medium that would better express what I had seen and which to communicate. A medium that used cubism, freedom, and invention. What was behind this content with the work I was doing, which was souring my success? In part, it was the conviction that life was changing, that after the war, nothing would be the same. I foresaw a new society where the bourgeoisie would vanish and their taste, served by the subtleties of cubism and the like, would no longer monopolize the functions of art. I was now ready to tear myself away from cubism. I met with the repeated failures, but I did not give up. It was as if an invisible force was pushing me onward.
Diego went to Montparnasse from Spain, and Angelina joined him. They began associating with Russians who gravitated around the writer Ilya Ehrenberg. Among these companions was a gifted young woman painter named Marievna Boroviev. Marievna seemed to have no friends in Paris. Pitying her loneliness, Angelina and Diego began inviting her to their home. She was a sort of she-devil because of her wild beauty and because of her fits of violence. Diego says,
I found Marievna terribly exciting, and one day she and I became lovers. In 1917, I left Angeline and lived with Marievna as my wife for a half year. Inevitably, it was an unhappy union, filled with an excruciating intensity that sapped us both. At last we agreed that we could not live together any longer. As I was leaving her hotel room, intending to return to Angeline, Marivna embraced me. A knife was hidden in her sleeve, and as I kissed her for the last time, she carved a wide gash in the back of my neck. I heard golden bells ringing and then dead silence. Afterward, Marivna cut her throat. Neither of us died. She told everybody we knew that I had left her pregnant. She eventually married Gorky. I returned to Angeline and started painting, but could not find buyers. We were dead broke. It was at that moment that our son Diego died. He got sick and I had no money for doctors or medicine. I was terribly depressed. Eventually I sold some paintings, and with the money I went to Italy to study the frescoes of the old masters. I was so avid to see the treasures of Michelangelo and Giotto, Paolo, Uccello, and Piero della Francesca that I could not bear to sleep. I would travel in third-class trains and also sleep there. In this way I saved time and money from lodging. I completed more than 300 sketches from the masters and everyday life. I got to the point I could apply what I had learned about mural painting. Alvaro Obregon was now the new president. An artist with my revolutionary point of view could now find a place in Mexico to work and grow. Goodbye to Italy, goodbye France, and goodbye Spain. The exile was coming home.
He felt reborn in 1921.
At home, coming produced an aesthetic exhilaration which is impossible to describe. All the colors were clearer, richer, more refined, and more full of light. I was in a world where the colors existed in absolute purity. I painted as naturally as I breathed or spoke. My style was born as children are born, in a moment that this birth had come after a tortuous pregnancy of 35 years.
He first started working in several odd jobs. Then he was allowed to cover a wall at the National Preparatory School of the University of Mexico.
I met Lupe Marin, my next love, through a mutual friend. To me, Lupe was a strange and marvelous-looking creature. She was black-haired, and her green eyes were so transparent that they seemed blind. Her face had Indian features.
Her first words when he met him were, "Diego is horrible." Then she turned around to see the room and his paintings. She ate some fruit and then said, "Are you going to paint me?" He painted her over and over again. From that day, they were together so many times that by mutual consent, they became lovers.
A few days after Lupe and I set up housekeeping, we went to the auditorium to paint my mural. While painting, I heard the voice of an unseen girl.
"On guard, Diego! Naui is coming!"
Naui was a talented woman painter who was posing for one of the auditorium figures. A voice said no more, but another time when I was at work with Naui, I heard it again.
"On guard, Diego! Here comes Lupe!"
Finally, one day, the unseen girl looked straight at me and asked,
"Would it cause you any annoyance if I watch you at work?" Diego said,
"No, young lady, I'll be charmed." She sat and watched me silently, her eyes riveted on every move of my brush. After a few hours, Lupe's jealousy was aroused and she began to insult the girl, but the girl paid no attention to her. This, of course, enraged Lupe more. Hands on hips, Lupe walked toward the girl and confronted her belligerently.
The girl merely stiffened and returned Lupe's stare without a word. Visibly amazed, Lupe glared at her a long time, then smiled and in a tone of grudging admiration said to Diego, "Look at that girl. Small as she is, she does not fear a tall, strong woman like me. I really like her."
That was my first encounter with Frida Kahlo.